Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. I'm Ethan Foster, here to explore the tiny cells that keep us going, and all the rules we break along the way. Let's call it health detective work, with a dash of dry sarcasm. Today we're taking on a colorful topic, and by colorful, I do mean bright fluorescent red. Yes, we're talking about the FDA's ban on red dye number 3.
I'm Alara Sky, the curious mind who can't resist poking at every corner of a story until something interesting pops out. Sometimes that something is comedy, sometimes it's a smidge of wisdom. Occasionally it's both, and that's when the real fireworks happen. Today we're talking about an iconic additive that's found in everything from candy to cough syrup. I hear it makes your sausage links look so festive that you forget all about that suspiciously neon hue.
All hail the neon sausage indeed. The FDA recently decided that this particular brand of red is too hot to handle. No pun intended. Although, in fairness, maybe that pun is fully intended. They've declared that by January 2027, red dye number 3 must vanish from foods, and by January 2028, from medications as well. It's like a forced retirement for a dye that's had quite the career.
It's a busy schedule for a colorant that's been painting the town red, literally, for decades. Now, if you're someone who picks up a box of strawberry cupcakes and wonders if that luscious pink color came from actual strawberries, this ban might feel vindicating. Or if you're in the camp that believes color should be as intense and screamingly bright as possible, you might be mourning the end of an era.
Let's talk about how we got here. It involves something called the Delaney Clause. Sounds like a piece of old legal text you'd find in an antique trunk in your grandmother's attic, next to crocheted doilies and polka-dotted curtains from 1960.
Close. The Delaney Clause is a real vintage piece of legislation from 1960 that basically says, if a substance has been shown to cause cancer in animals or humans, it can't be used as a food additive. No ifs, ands, or bright red buts about it.
Which is exactly what happened. There were studies pointing to cancer in male rats exposed to high doses of red dye number 3. The FDA notes that the mechanism behind the rat tumors isn't really something that carries over to humans, but the official stance is basically, we have this old law that says if it's found to cause cancer, even in lab animals, it can't be in our food supply. And so, the ban hammer was dropped.
I do admire a straightforward rule. It's the whole, if you see even one cockroach, you can't just politely ask it to pay rent approach. If there's any sign of trouble, no more artificial color in your candy or your ingestible products. And that's that.
It raises an interesting question. Why was this dye allowed in food when it was already banned in cosmetics and topical drugs decades ago? Apparently, it was restricted in makeup and lotions around 1990, but for some reason, the color was permitted to linger in our cereals and fruit cups. At some point, it must have slipped past the logic department. The official word from the FDA on that is basically silence. No explanation, just better late than never, I suppose.
Yes, the cosmic entity known as red dye number 3 has been living the dream, dancing around in gumballs and red velvet cupcakes for years after it was exiled from lipsticks and lotions. It's like the color equivalent of that friend who got kicked out of your house party, then sneaked in through the back door and kept partying in the basement.
Let's look at how exactly red dye number 3 can cause trouble. According to various studies, it's been linked to thyroid dysfunction, the formation of thyroid tumors, again, in animals, and even messing with brain function by increasing oxidative stress and promoting neuroinflammation. It's basically your body's version of thanks but no thanks.
Lovely. If there's one thing we all want to avoid, it's fueling a tiny internal bonfire of oxidative stress. Red dye. Number 3 is also said to interfere with the absorption of iodine, which your body uses to make crucial thyroid hormones. Instead of letting your body do that important job, the dye is busy gumming up the works like that coworker who always hits reply all to every single email thread.
I sometimes wonder who tested all of this in the first place. One moment, you have a bunch of lab rats wearing little name tags. The next moment, you're feeding them neon red candy canes for months on end, waiting to see if anything goes haywire. Meanwhile, you wonder if the rats are about to unionize and request hazard pay.
They're certainly braver than I am. Personally, if my ice cream glows under a black light, I'm going to ask some serious questions. But for a long time, many people simply grabbed their colorful treats without reading the label. That's changing now, thanks to these research findings.
Meanwhile, the new ban extends to medications as well. That might catch people by surprise. If you look at your typical pink or red pill, the color is partly to help you differentiate it from the other 17 pills in your weekly dispenser. Also, bright colors are an advertising tool. When your cough syrup is a vibrant magenta, apparently it sells better because people associate color with potency.
The funny part is that we never demanded to have day-glow cough syrups. It was a marketing tactic that convinced us we wanted them. Now we have to collectively backtrack, realizing maybe we didn't need a luminescent swirl of pink poison after all. I guess a plain white pill is about to become more fashionable.
It's like your closet going from a disco ball aesthetic to a minimalist palette overnight. But it's not just medication. This ban affects thousands of products. Some estimates say over 8,000 items on the market contain red dye number 3. That includes candy, soda, cereals, baked goods, your bacon bits. Wait, bacon bits?
Yes, bacon bits. Turns out that if you want your bacon to look especially bacony, let's just toss in some artificial red. Ironically, it's that artificially tinted color that's letting you know your imitation bacon bits are extra processed. It's not even actual bacon, it's like an impersonator of bacon, hopped up on red dye. That's some next level irony.
But it's important to note that while January 2027 and January 2028 might seem far away, manufacturers are already taking steps. Plenty of brands are shifting to other artificial dyes, like red dye number 40, or they're experimenting with natural colorants. You could end up seeing beetroots or carmine or anthocyanins on ingredient lists. Carmine, by the way, is made from crushed bugs, so that might add a new dimension to your candy experience.
When that label reads carmine, you might picture a sophisticated painter's palette, but you're actually nibbling on an insect-based pigment. That's an interesting conversation starter, especially if you're in the break room at work, unwrapping a pink donut. You can say, the subtle nuance of these ground-up cochineal insects is positively delightful. Who needs small talk about the weather?
Right, though I'll bet some folks would rather see bugs in the ingredient list than something that's possibly connected to thyroid issues. It's a tough choice. To their credit, some companies are also looking at beet and fruit extracts, which might help with the color, but can alter the taste slightly. The cost can go up too. When you're extracting color from natural sources instead of cooking up cheap chemicals in a lab, it can get pricey.
It's always that balancing act. The brand doesn't want their candy to suddenly taste like root vegetables or their soda to take on an earthy aftertaste. Then you have the consumer side. We love a vibrant red candy, but we're not necessarily prepared to pay double. So we'll see how this shakes out. In any case, it's probably good news for folks who want more transparent labeling and fewer chemicals in their diets.
I can picture the grocery store shelves in 2027. Maybe your cereal boxes will say, now with 100% less red dye number 3. Don't worry, we found something else to turn your milk pink. Because apparently we cannot accept cereal that looks like actual grain. It must be tinted like a rainbow.
Of course not. How would we know we're having fun unless our breakfast looks like confetti? But in all seriousness, this ban reflects a changing attitude toward artificial additives. This time, the hammer fell on red dye number 3 next time. It might be red dye number 40, or yellow number 5, or something else. The conversation about food safety is ongoing.
It definitely makes you wonder. For years, many European countries had stricter rules, and now you're seeing the US slowly get in line on certain things. California already enacted its own ban. Now it's nationwide. Perhaps we're witnessing a shift where synthetic dyes get more scrutiny. Meanwhile, the natural color folks are saying, finally, everyone sees our brilliance. Pun intended.
The curious part is that red dye number 3's ban was triggered by research from decades ago showing thyroid tumors in rats. The FDA is basically saying that the mechanism by which that happened isn't relevant to humans. Yet, the ban stands because of that old-fashioned Delaney clause. If that clause didn't exist, would we still be guzzling pink sports drinks with abandon? Possibly.
Sounds about right. Which brings up the question, if we base these bans on older rules, are we going to rely on even older rules for the rest of the dyes? Maybe. It's ironically comedic. A single line in a 1960 regulation referencing cancer in animals is still the reason we're rummaging through ingredient lists today.
I guess that's one of the joys of reading labels closely. You realize that your favorite cereal is part sugar, part crunchy corn byproduct, and part color-coded carnival. So is it that surprising that red dye number 3 is basically derived from petroleum? Kind of a downer to think the same base that fuels your car might also fuel your fruit punch's scarlet glow.
And here I thought the most shocking thing about fruit punch was the questionable fruit content. We've gone from, where's the real fruit in my punch, to, why am I possibly ingesting a petroleum-based dye that got rats in trouble back in 1960? The more you know.
If listeners are wondering how to respond, it could start with a simple shift. Read the ingredient list on anything that's bright red, pink, or even orange. You might spot red number 3 or FD and C red number 3. It might also show up as E127 or erythrocene. If you see any of those, you'll know that products' days are numbered anyway.
Exactly. By 2027, the brand has to change the formula or stop producing it. But for the time being, it can still be on the shelf. That's why some folks are skipping the wait and simply phasing it out of their diet now. No point in staging a farewell party for a color that's been overstaying its welcome.
It's sort of like you know your landlord is about to evict that troublesome neighbor who blasts music at 3 a.m. The official eviction notice might still be a few months out, but you can just go knock on their door today and say, look, I'm calling the COPS next time. Kindly keep it down. Or in this case, politely read the ingredient label and put the snack back on the shelf if the words red number 3 jump out at you.
On the plus side, fresh produce has never needed artificial dyes to shine. If you want red, just grab a handful of strawberries. Even if it's not quite as neon, it'll satisfy your craving without dabbling in the questionable realm of industrial pigments. Although, I guess if you want your fruit to glow in the dark, that's a different conversation entirely.
Well, that could be the next big fad. Glow-in-the-dark organic bananas, anyone? For now, I'll stick to the normal ones and keep my sense of wonder for actual healthful foods, thanks.
So, to recap, the FDA is banning red dye number 3 in food by January 2027 and in medications by January 2028. The reason is older research that triggered the Delaney Clause. There's talk about thyroid tumors in rats. The FDA points out that the mechanism doesn't apply to humans, yet the ban is proceeding, partly because of the legal requirement. Meanwhile, manufacturers can either switch to other artificial dyes, like Red 40, or go for natural sources like beets, anthocyanins, or carmine. Consumers may see a slight price increase or notice subtle differences in taste, but hopefully we'll gain a healthier food supply in the long run.
Indeed. This might also prompt folks to pay more attention to other synthetic dyes that remain on the market. Maybe red dye number 3 is just the first in a new wave of forced retirements, or maybe the rest will retire on their own someday. For now, at least, we know this is one color that's about to fade from our plates.
If you love a good strawberry-flavored snack, don't panic. Brands will find another way to make it pink. Life goes on, just hopefully with fewer, questionable additives. And if you really want that bright color, there's always beets. Or maybe those cochineal insects. Just choose your red carefully.
Before we sign off, a final thought. The more we educate ourselves about what's in our food, the simpler it becomes to make decisions that align with our values. Like keeping a well-functioning thyroid, for example. Nobody wants to eat something that inadvertently picks a fight with their hormones.
Well said. That's all for today's episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. Thank you for listening to our casual banter on red dye number 3 and the so-called joys of artificially colored bacon bits. If your cereal glows like a neon sign, maybe ask yourself why. Simple question, not so simple answer.
Join us next time when we tackle another fascinating topic lurking in the fine print of your grocery list. Until then, I'm Alara Sky.
And I'm Ethan Foster. May your meals be colorful in the natural, honest way. And may your glow-in-the-dark cupcakes rest in peace. Take care, everyone.